Hello, everyone. Welcome to Down the Rabbit Hole. And today it's Ian and myself. Rachel's unavailable. She had a number of appointments. So next week she'll be back, and we're going to do the gadget show next week.
Yep.
Because we thought about doing it this week, and then she wanted to be here for that show, of course, because she has questions and she wanted to talk about it. So next week is our gadget show. So Ian will be talking about all of the ghost hunting equipment and his experience with it, since Rachel and I have very limited experience with any of that. We just are our own piece of equipment. But today we are talking about a really awesome subject. So see this fantastic building here behind me? Wow, look at this. Okay, it's huge. It actually goes all the way back here and all the way over here. It was massive. It was originally 750 acres of land on the mountain brow in Hamilton, Ontario. And it was known as the Hamilton Asylum. And then it went through a couple of other various, names over the years. But we've always kind of referred to it as the asylum. Now, I have some personal experience from the site, but I also have a personal story that happened here where I live that is part of the site. So it's a really strange story. I've probably told it before, but I'm going to tell it again because I think that it was just such an interesting connection. But obviously, this building doesn't exist anymore, but Century House. So there is a piece of the structure right here that still stands today, although apparently, and I don't know if you've heard this, Ian, it's on the destroy, get rid of, and demolish.
Yeah, the provincial government has sold that particular piece of land,
Yes.
and unfortunately, the preservation efforts of those who have been attempting to save this building,
Right.
unfortunately, their efforts are now, for nil because it's been sold to a developer. And I'm pretty darn sure that building is going to go under the wrecking ball.
I know. And it's really unfortunate because it's such an amazing piece of history in Hamilton. And
And it's the only original building to the asylum that still exists.
yes, yes. And I mean, they did build a new mental health center essentially on part of the property. So it would be it's too bad that they couldn't have saved that part of the building and turned it into an administrative office or even a museum for the old asylum, because it really is such a fascinating place and it's so huge. I mean, you can't really get the scope of the size here. And clearly in this picture, I mean, there's automobiles here in the picture and that. So I think, up until the 1930s, it had not changed a whole lot. And it's really a shame. I mean, I feel like it's a shame that they're going to, bulldoze down the last bit of it, the Century, I think it's called Century House.
Century Manor.
Century Manor, yes, because it is the original entrance of the building, I believe. I could be wrong there, but I think it is. By looking at it, I'm pretty sure it is this piece of the structure, is it not? Or is it another?
No, it's actually, okay,
Oh,
in your photograph, you've got that big building in front.
Yes, yes.
Okay, that was called the Barton Building.
Okay, the Barton Building, yeah.
Century Manor is, if you look over your right shoulder,
Yep.
Century Manor is that big house right behind it.
Oh, so right
in
here.
the photograph. That's Century Manor.
Okay, yeah, because I know it was like it was a part of the original, I think, before they really expanded. And I believe that it was part of the original. I think I have actually a photograph of it. I'm going to go and see if I can pull that up so that people can see it. So let's go see here. I will change my virtual background out. And I will add that photo. So what do you want to tell us about what you know about it? Because I'm familiar with some of the history, but I'm familiar with a firsthand story in a weird kind of roundabout way.
Well, I'm the same thing. I have a couple of paranormal stories to tell.
Okay.
As far as the history of the building, it's it was a hospital for the insane.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I really don't have a whole heck of a lot of knowledge about it. Um, I was never a patient there.
I don't think
Although I do know some people who think that I probably should be, but
yes. There's Century Manor.
there's Century Manor.
Yeah, look at that. It's so spectacular. I mean, it's what a shame that that's going to come down. I mean, I know that it looks like it probably needs a lot of work,
It does.
but such a shame.
It does. Well, part of what I have to talk about on the show here today is I've actually been inside there.
Yes, I have too,
Um,
actually. Hmm.
just after, well, yeah, I'll just get into the story here.
Go ahead.
So just after Century Manor had actually closed as part of the active hospital in the mid 1990s,
Hmm.
I took a temporary job as security at the
Oh,
hospital because I
wow.
wanted to pick up a few extra bucks, and it was just for a couple of weeks, just a temp job. And Christmas was coming, and so it's like, sure, go pick up a few extra dollars. And so part of my security duties was to patrol around the hospital grounds. And yeah, I was lucky enough to actually have been, given the authority to have access into that building. And even back then, it was starting to get rough. It had just been shut down. It was closed. All maintenance appeared to have been, just cut out.
Okay.
And yeah, even back then, it was rough for sure. So I could just imagine what it's like now that it's been abandoned
Yeah,
for
worse.
for what,
Mhm.
30 years now. But yeah,
Wow. Oh, are
but
you?
but what's really cool is in the I don't know if they're still there or not because there's a whole brand new modern hospital on the site now.
Right, yes.
But at the time, from the incarnation of the hospital that was there in the 90s, there were all these underground tunnels
Yes.
that linked all of the buildings together. And that was really cool. Some of them were really creepy
Hmm.
because they were absolutely dark. And when I say dark, I don't mean in terms of paranormal.
No,
I
just
mean in
like,
terms of that there was a 2-watt light bulb hanging from the ceiling,
right.
which just added to the creepiness of it. But it was really cool to be able to go through these tunnels.
Wow.
And the old morgue was down there, and there were
Right.
tunnels that went nowhere because they led to part of where the old hospital was. And of course, at the end of that tunnel, there is no building there above it anymore. So there were all these closed off tunnels, abandoned tunnels. It was really cool to
What a spot, like, and
yeah.
doing those security gigs, right? You really have an opportunity to spend time with the building without everybody else around. And speaking of that, sort of jumping the shark, but we should do a show on that because my first husband was a security guard at the Winter Garden Theater in Toronto. So I've got some amazing stories. And actually, a good friend of mine also, they together, the two of them, were working as night security there before it was ever redone and open to the public again. It was. And I was in there. Wow, it's crazy. So we should do a show on that. Just
Yeah.
yeah. But again, doing this as a security guard, you do get some perks, I guess.
Yeah, or they say I got to explore all these old underground tunnels, and at that point there were still some existed at that time.
Wow.
So it was cool to be able to go inside those as well. But yeah, now unfortunately, Century is the only one that still exists, and it sure looks, as I say, it's not
Yes.
going to be so for much longer.
No. While we were chatting there, I did manage to get some history on it. And I did know the history. I just didn't want to like kind of blurt it out because it's kind of important to get it correct because it does have a varying shift in its intention. Right. So I just want to go through initially, the Hamilton Asylum was founded in response to the 19th century temperance movement. So petitions in 1867 requested a place of detention for the inebriates of the province. So people who were alcoholics. And so within 6 years, the provincial government responded, purchased 100 acres of land overlooking the city of Hamilton. The location was considered ideal as the asylum itself was isolated and would be many miles away. So at that time, the division between up the mountain and down the mountain, you had an issue trying to go between the two, right? And so it was it was well separated from the city. So it says, along with many other asylums and penal institutions, Hamilton's asylum creation was largely due to the actions of the first premier, John Sandfield Macdonald. So I'm not sure that's John. That's not John A. This is John
No.
Sandfield Macdonald. So possibly a relation. In 1868, he enacted the Prison and Asylum Inspection Act, beginning a campaign of reform that expanded the number of large publicly funded institutions and brought them under the watchful eye of the Inspector of Prisons, Asylums, and Public Charities of Ontario. So due to a high number of mentally ill persons needing care and the pressure already placed on the province and its other asylums, it was decided that they would build this facility for the maintenance of the province's demented minds and lunatics. So guys, we're just going to say this is not politically correct, right? Today we would never refer to people like that, but this is 1876. The asylum was deemed the Hamilton Asylum for the Insane, and Dr. Richard Maurice Buck was the superintendent, who would become the prominent asylum caretaker and the author. He spent only 1 year there before he was appointed to the provincial asylum in London, Ontario, and he was replaced by a Dr. James Wallace. So sort of skipping forward at this point, we have what it says here is, nonetheless, the location was inconveniently near a precipitous descent, and the approach to the building was troublesomely steep. Though conversation of the asylum from one of the inebriates to one for the insane, since the needs of the insane were justly deemed more pressing and practical than those of the dipsomaniacs or alcoholics. So initially it was a facility for alcoholism, and probably I believe the intention would have been to help people get over that, to get through it. But because there was an overabundance of insane people in the province, they needed to build this huge asylum. So looking at it, initially it was 596 acres, and it also ran its own farm. So it was self-producing. They were growing produce, raising livestock.
It was, yeah.
Yeah. So really, really interesting, almost like a working facility. And I guess depending on the state of one's mind, would depend on whether you would work, looking after animals, or perhaps growing produce, or working in the kitchens and all of these things. But let's just get into the nitty gritty of the asylum, because it's an asylum. So when necessary, it was deemed that hospital staff employed restraint on patients. So using leather muffs for troublesome men and the camisole for women, custodial care remained the primary form of treatment up until the 1950s, with new drug therapies, electroconvulsive therapies, and psychotherapy took over as the main form of therapy.